I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Nothing, Murray, you're fine.
Okay, well, again, if you didn't hear me, welcome to our December meeting. It's the last meeting of 2021. I am so glad this year is over. I don't know about you, but it's been rough. But I am so grateful for all of you, for being here, for your contributions. And because of our network, we have stayed together, and we will continue to do that in the new year. So with that being said, I would like to spotlight Phyllis, who's going to introduce our speaker for today, which I'm really, really looking forward to hearing.
And again, thank you everybody for joining us for this very important and timely meeting. As you know, education is part of our mission statement, and this is certainly going to add to our knowledge of what we're doing. Our speaker today is Kate Wright, who is the Chief of Staff for the Arizona Department of Education. Kate has a long history in education. She's been with the Arizona Department of Education for over 5 years, and previously was the Dean for Special Programs in the College of Education at the University of Phoenix. She's been active in K-12 education for over 25 years as a teacher, district coordinator, higher education administrator, and now representing the State Department of Education. I'm sure after her presentation, you will have questions for her. Please put those in the chat room, and we will try and see if Kate can answer as many as we have time for. Thank you very much. Please don't forget to use your chat feature. Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you all for having me this morning. I also will say that I appreciate you allowing me to be a substitution for Superintendent Hoffman, who on a regular December morning would, I'm sure, be very happy to be with you. Superintendent Hoffman welcomed her first baby on November the 16th. She had a 9-pound, 7-ounce daughter. Her name is Clara Emlyn, and so she is still on maternity leave, and we expect that she will stay home with her baby through mid-January. And so in the meantime, I'm trying to help keep things rolling, and very happy to be with you this morning to represent the Department of Education. I am going to share my screen, and I am more than happy to answer questions at the end, and I will try to be as thorough as I can throughout. And Phyllis, if you can just let me know, can you see my slides? Okay, great. Okay, so in thinking about what to discuss this morning, I wanted to give an update and a snapshot on where we are through the pandemic and where we're hoping to be beyond. I appreciated Marie's comments to get us started. I felt like I ended 2020 with the same sentiment. I was happy to see 2020 go. I actually think there is a lot to celebrate in 2021, but I'm really looking forward to 22 and hopeful that we'll be in an easier place, that's for sure. We have done a lot through the pandemic. As you can imagine, this has been a very challenging, I shouldn't say as you can imagine, as you know and are well aware, this has been a very challenging 20 months for our schools and for our educators and for the department in supporting them in ways in which we are not accustomed to necessarily doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what the department does and what we've really been focused on in the last several months. This is just a quick snapshot of what we have as far as our educational landscape in the state. We have over 1 million students. And so as you can imagine, when we were operating fully remotely over the last several months, that was quite a challenge to reach our 1.1 million students. We have over 2,000 schools in the state, and that includes our district and our charter public education schools. We support over 60,000 educators. across 22 tribal nations. I'll add to this slide as well, just a sort of general understanding of what the Department of Education has in place as far as a state agency. We have 4 locations in the state. We have 2 offices here in Phoenix. We've got one where I'm sitting today, which is the oldest one and one that you're likely most familiar with on the Capitol. We had a second office in Phoenix that was on Central Avenue. To add to the excitement of the pandemic, we have relocated in the last 2 months from that office space to a space that became available through the Department of Administration. So we now have 2 Phoenix locations on the Capitol, which really house the majority of our staff. But we do have an office in Flagstaff, and we also have an office in Tucson, and we have some remote teams that operate out of Yuma. So we make an effort to reach across the state in our locations. We have over 650,000, no, it might feel like that, 650 employees in the department, not 1,000 employees. And that, that's quite a big agency as far as a state agency. We're one of the largest state agencies in the state. From talking to my national colleagues, we are lucky in the sense that we have a large state agency comparatively speaking. So that is a good thing as far as being able to support. But one of the challenges in thinking about how the Department of Ed operates, especially during a crisis, is that we are not a policy setting agency. So the department serves as an administrative agency for the state. Policy is set through legislature and through state board. Rules are set through the State Board of Education. So as far as questions at the end, and there may be things that you're thinking about or hearing as we approach our legislative session, it's really important. Those things that happen in the legislative session are really critical to the function of the department, because we have to administer all of the things that come to be through the legislative session, yet we are not a part of actually developing or setting that policy. So that's one of our challenges. The other thing that's important to discuss as we start the conversation today is that Arizona is a local control state. So our LEAs and their governing boards have authority over much of their work. So when it comes to curriculum, their focus, their priorities, those are all set at the local level. That's not atypical to many of our other state partners, but that does set the landscape of education for Arizona. We at the state have found that one of our greatest challenges over the last 20 months has been administering federal grants, and we'll talk about that. That's work that we've always done, it's historic work, but we have had more federal funds sent to the state in public education overall in the last 20 months than ever before in history. And so there is a huge opportunity, which we'll talk about, and then a huge challenge, which is just the flip side of that coin. The Department of Education set a vision over the last 2 years with Superintendent Hoffman in the lead. And our vision is equity for all students to achieve their full potential. And we have some key priorities under that vision. The first is student equity and achievement. And when we talk about equity in practice at the department, we're talking about opportunities and access for students and educators within the state. We've done some things within this priority in the last 2 years that I think really impact our ability to address this priority. The first is that we've developed and established an Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion with an associate superintendent in the lead of that work. And I'll talk more about what that department is doing for the agency. What some of the key things that they've done over the last year is they've established an equity framework. We have also established a teaching and learning framework in partnership with West Ed, which sets our internal focus around teaching and learning for the entire department, and then allows us to work very uniformly with our state partners. We've also engaged a consultant, an equity consultant, to help the department internally. So we have both an external and an internal focus on equity at the department. And then we've established an Office of Digital Teaching and Learning, because one of the things that became most apparent during the pandemic was the lack of equity and access when it comes to digital, the digital divide. So as I mentioned, we serve 22 tribal lands, many of them rural and remote, many of them without the infrastructure to support their students in a digital landscape. So we have dedicated in this first year $1 million to this office, and they've done some initial work in partnership with ASU around an opportunity assessment that actually was administered to our LEAs this past month and closed this week, which will provide us with some really clear information around how we need to support our LEAs from a digital standpoint. Our second priority is around educator recruitment and retention. That's not new, but it's a heightened priority for Superintendent Hoffman. We have an educator and recruitment team. It's the first time that we've dedicated funds to actually have staff in the agency whose sole work is around recruitment and retention of teachers. And they have several partners, which I'll talk about when I talk about our funding and some of our investments. But that team has several initiatives, including Troops to Teachers, which have been very successful, and partnering with the Arizona K-12 Center and some other state partners. Our Safe and Healthy Schools is our third priority within our vision for the department. That's a huge priority and something that we've been investing in over the last couple of years. And I'll talk to how we're using our own federal money to support this. But internally, we have a team, a school safety team, which focuses on the mental health and social well-being of our students and our teachers in the state. The last two priorities really look internally first. So we have a strategic funding team, and that priority there is to make sure that we are as positioned as possible, as well positioned, to support our state partners in how they spend their money. And that's always been something that's important. So our LEAs in particular, some of our remote and rural, get a lot of federal funding and do not have a large administrative staff to help them both apply for that funding and administer it. So the department's been aware of that for several years and has been working towards building supports. But the last 2 years have become incredibly important in helping our LEAs to think about and plan for how they spend and invest their federal dollars. So we have an intra-agency team, a strategic funding team that meets every other week. It encompasses all of our federal and state grant programs, and we are working with the field and also with our staff inside the department to make sure that we're positioned to help the LEAs understand the best ways in which they can invest their dollars. One thing I can say to that work is this year alone, we have received more in additional federal aid than we receive in a typical year across all of our programs. So we've doubled the amount of money that we need to get out to our schools just in 12 months. And so while we can sort of bolster our teams to get the money to the schools, they now have that much more money that they need to determine what are the best ways to spend money to support students and teachers. And it's on the surface, it seems like a huge win. In the practicality piece of it, it's a tremendous challenge and to some degree a liability, because our schools and the state know that we will be judged in how we invest this money, and in some ways with a very short term limit on what we've done with the funding. So there's a lot of focus on helping to support this work. The last priority ties directly to the strategic funding, and that is strategic data. One of the department's weaknesses, quite frankly, is that we are not creative or innovative in our use of data. And I just say that very practically. We collect the data that we need to report to our state and federal entities. We do that annually. We're pretty good at that. We don't do anything beyond that, usually. We take the data, we submit the reports to the federal government, we check the box, and then we put what we can, in a very limited sense, on our website for access for our education partners. We don't have We haven't in the past had much capacity to do more than that. We don't have a team of researchers at the department. We don't have data analysts. Or I should say very limited. We have 2 in our accountability team that do that work. But again, that's focused on state report cards, which are federal, and the accountability system, which is our state system. So we've really had to always focus on the requirements. What must we do? And what we recognized is that if we're going to be looking at investing large amounts of money, supporting an achievement gap, the closure of it, supporting investments in the digital divide, we've got to be better about our data and what we can give back to the field, because they can't make decisions unless they know. And we can't make decisions statewide unless we've got evidence and data to support that. So we've invested heavily in this, and I don't mean financially. There's been some financial investment, but from a capacity and a human resources level, we've really looked at how can we improve the data that we share with the field. And I'll talk about this and I think I'll try to show you a little bit of our website if there's time. We're working on building a data dashboard, which looks at the data beyond just what's required to report and in ways in which we haven't made connections previously. And we've been very strategic in trying to look for partners who can help us in this work. So we have partnered with ASU. They've given us 2 data analysts on loan that sit in the department to help us here. We've also partnered with Helios and Rel West to try to get additional capacity to look at data as a state so that we can have education conversations that go beyond just federal requirements and really look at where we need to be in the next 20 years to support our students and our educators. I'm probably going to talk about some of these things before we get to the slides. And so if I've done that, I won't spend a whole lot of additional time. I've talked a little bit about our education recruitment and retention team. That's one of the important things that we've added staff to support, especially knowing that the pandemic's created additional gaps, not just in our teachers in the classroom, but also in our classified staff. So I'm sure that you've heard over the past 4 months, it's been highly publicized nationally that we've got a bus driver shortage, we have cafeteria worker shortages. We are really lacking in our classified staff that just support the operation of our schools. And that educator recruitment and retention team has partnered with DES and with the human resources groups within our schools to start to build a job board to really support the promotion of and recruitment of these positions that are so important. I touched on the fact that we have an associate superintendent of equity, diversity, and inclusion who has a team right now of just 3, but who also oversees our unique populations team, which includes our Office of English Language Acquisition Services, our foster, migrant, and homeless education programs. So we've got, and that's a kind of a reorganization within the department. We're really focused on our most marginalized and most COVID impacted communities within that team. And then we're also working on extending that through all of our teams. And that's something that's going to be a key priority for us in 2022. We've expanded our Office of Indian Education. We invested $1 million over the last year to expand that work, and we've grown that team to now 6, which is the largest team in the Office of Indian Ed that we've had over the course of time in the department. And that work is both policy work and practitioner work. And I'll give, as we get into our slides this morning, I'll give some clear examples of what they're doing to support practitioners in the field. I already touched on our internal strategic funding committee, the work that we're doing to support the investments of our LEAs. And then something else that we've done over the course of the last several months that we've never done in previous years where there wasn't a crisis, but it's something we're going to continue post-COVID, is we have weekly calls with both education leaders and education organizations. So we have a Wednesday afternoon call. It's just a 30-minute call we've had for the last 10 months. And any school leader who wants to join has the Zoom link. and we've got rotating topics, and we just allow for space for education leaders to be able to connect with the department and each other. I think as we've been trying to navigate how best to find solutions, one of the greatest assets of the department is just to create space and to facilitate conversations and to bring people together. And that, I would say, when we kind of talked about leaving 2021, that's something I don't want us to leave behind. There are some really good things that came to be over the last year in particular, once we got our legs under us in COVID, that we really need to continue. These calls and regular communications are one of them. We've also really focused on how do we serve our department. So the Department of Education, as I mentioned, has over 650 employees. We are focused on supporting the mental health and the well-being of our staff. And that's been a real priority for the department, particularly in the last 10 months. We've been primarily a remote agency. Our state agencies, so we are under the Department of Administration, has remained fully remote. So we are one of only 2 agencies that has returned to the office in the last 10 months, which has been a challenge in the sense that we've had to sort of make things as we go internally. And so when I talk about resources, we created an ADE wellness toolkit, knowing that as we bring staff back to work, they're going to need additional supports. We've also partnered with ComPsych, which is part of our health benefits, and other partners serving state employees. And as I mentioned, we have regular external calls. We have regular internal meetings, and we were talking prior to starting today, just that Zoom isn't my preferred way to communicate. I certainly would prefer to be with all of you in person this morning, but it does allow for those breakout spaces, which are a really good way to problem solve. So our internal teams have gotten really good at using those small group sessions to come up with solutions to bring back to the full group. So we've been thoughtful and intentional in how we provide that space for leadership, including webinars and open communication. The picture here on the slide is our new space. As I mentioned, we've moved staff to an AAUW building. That's the superintendent, 8 months pregnant there. And the other challenge in moving staff is the space that they're occupying is different. So previously they had very tall walls that separated them from their colleagues. We transitioned to lower walls to be more collaborative and serve partnership, which is, I think, for a long term, a great investment, a challenge in COVID to bring teams back into space like that. So we've been back in the office 1 day a week since June. We transitioned to 3 days in the office in November. That's our long-term hybrid plan, because what we've recognized is that while some other state agencies can operate really well fully remote, we did a great job. Our grants got out. We were able to do a lot of technical work, but we were not able to serve our schools on site, which is really important. So we recognize that our teams have to be an in-person service agency, and we've been really successful at that over the last few months, despite the challenges. So one of the greatest things that we've been tackling, besides the obvious COVID-related challenges, is this funding issue. And so we've had 3 different rounds of ESSER funding. We've been working to strategically leverage those for statewide initiatives. And actually, I'm going to take a second to take a quick break from the slides. Let's see here. See if I can make this happen. I'm going to try to share this other screen. Hang tight here. I want to just share our website for a second. And all right. Can you see our website, or do you still see the slides?
Oh, that's your website.
Okay, perfect. So this, and I'll move myself back up. This is a long scrolling page, and I'm going to put the link here in the chat so that you can access it after the call today, and I'll do that in just a second. But we have tried very hard to be transparent about how the state is investing the federal dollars and in what ways we've made decisions. And as education stakeholders, it's really important that we all understand what we're doing at the department to invest millions. These are millions and millions of dollars that the department has received. We early on decided we had to be very clear about how we were making decisions around funding. So here we created a rubric to ensure that our priorities were being met in every way that we invested federal dollars. So we are focused on the communities most impacted by COVID, that we are expanding access to evidence-based programs and trainings, and that we are focusing on social and emotional well-being, educator workforce shortages, and family connection. Another piece that the department has not historically focused on, what is now very critical for us, is how do we measure the success and the impact of what we're doing at a state agency to support our schools and in partnership with higher education. So I'm not going to go through all of these, and I'll talk to some specific ones that we're really proud of and focused on, but I just wanted you to be aware that this page exists. It talks to all the things that the department has invested funding in. We used our priorities to bucket how we looked at this. So we focused around student education or student equity and achievement, educator recruitment and retention. We really focused here on partners that already had systems in place to support this work, and to be thoughtful around being equitable in all of our teaching, all of our communities, and all of our higher education partners. And I'll put that chat, let me put that in the chat now while I'm not sharing, in case you want to go back at some point and look at the ways in which. All right, now let me try to be technical savvy here and get me back to my slides. We've had to look for support in a lot of the work that we've done over the last year, and the second bullet speaks to that. We really needed to bolster our own understanding of evidence-based programs, train our staff. We've hired 5 new specialists who are focused just on helping schools identify ways in which they can evaluate whether something that they're investing in is evidence-based. And we've provided trainings and we've partnered with education leaders to help us lead that work. The last bullet I spoke to just briefly, which is looking at how we measure whether we've been successful. And that's something that we are working on now as we continue to make these investments. So some of the fun things that we've been able to do over the last year, around student equity and achievement, we invested with Discovery Education. We actually followed the lead of Nevada, who provided Discovery Education for all of their educators in the state. And so at this point, every single school in the state of Arizona has access to Discovery Education. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means for them as far as equity of resources. We also partnered with ASU this summer to do something called Math Momentum. And I have a slide that talks to what that is and how that supported teachers and students. And we are in the middle of a special education cost study that we think really speaks to this equity and achievement piece. And I can talk about that as well. So Discovery Education. This is an online platform. It is provided at no cost to every teacher, and it provides virtual tools and resources that are already aligned to the Arizona K-12 standards. And so we are, while the department has no curriculum management authority, because I mentioned at the beginning, there's local control. So we do help to set standards that get adopted by the State Board of Education. But when it comes to actual curriculum and educational resources, we don't mandate or create them at the department. This discovery education, though, has served to be a really good partner in leveling the playing field for teachers across the state, so that now at no cost, it doesn't matter if you're in inner city, urban, rural, remote, as long as you have online access, you have access to the same tools, the same resources, the same videos that support learning and have already been made aligned to the K-12 standards. We are also, as I mentioned, working with ASU to boost math and digital literacy skills with middle schools. They are serving over 40 schools that are most severely impacted by the pandemic. They worked with 5,000 students over the summer to get them caught up to start the school year. And we are focused in this project on middle school age students because we held an Equitable and Effective Schools Task Force for 2 days in June with practitioners who told us they are most concerned about these transition aged students, middle school to high school to post-secondary. So we've made some clear partnerships to help support middle school students as they are getting ready to transition to high school math so that they are in a place where they can be successful. And I won't talk in depth to all of these slides, but they will be shared with you if they haven't already. So just so that you know, if I miss something, let me know at the end. I can talk to it, or you'll have access at the end of the presentation as well. I've talked a little bit about educator recruitment and retention already. These things I think are investments that have been very intentional. We had a virtual teacher institute last summer that supported teachers, thousands of teachers, in being able to do digital learning when we started the school year. We also have a very successful and exciting partnership with the University of Arizona around the recruitment and retention of math educators. We've been able to expand that work so that it's available to all schools and all counties, where previously it was limited in scope. So we've really doubled the access of this work. It's professional learning for math educators. We were able to hold a virtual conference in partnership with the University of Arizona that served over 1,200 educators who participated. And we are in partnership with the K-12 Center through NAU to provide teacher mentoring. And that's something that the K-12 Centers does every single year, but they typically can only fund through NAU 5 to 7 districts in a comprehensive mentorship program for new teachers. This year they had 23 districts apply, and the department funded the difference so that all 23 districts were able to participate in full teacher mentorship this year. And we're also working on the Indigenous teacher prep programs through all 3 of our state universities. And I talked a little bit about this just now. With the K-12 Center, who has a full year-long mentorship program, this year we were able to help them and NAU so that every district who applied is able to participate. And it really does represent the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And when we looked at this, as far as the communities that are most impacted, we not only looked at things that are traditional education related indicators like AZ merit test scores or our standardized base test scores. When we were looking for the past year, we looked at other things in partnership with the Maricopa County government. It's MAG, Maricopa Association of Government, helped us with additional data, including unemployment data, digital resource data, so that we knew we were supporting communities that not only were struggling academically, but who also within the context of their community and the supports that they had needed more resources. And that goes back to, I think, our focus on really trying to be better data-driven, a better data-driven agency. Something else that we've done over the last year, which was a first, for us is we created an educator peer support program in partnership with DES. DES created something similar for healthcare workers and military folks to provide peer-to-peer contact. So during the beginning of the pandemic, when our healthcare workers were gravely impacted and really struggling, DES provided a resource where if I was a nurse, I had 20 other nurses that were volunteers that I could call and get support from informally. We were able to partner with DES to create the same program for administrators and teachers in the last year. So we have 25 educators and 15 previous administrators who are either retired or are working reduced hours, who are on call for other educators and administrators to reach out to just for support, to express that they're burned out, they're tired, they're stressed, and to have someone else who's done the exact same job or who may still be doing it, listen, provide a thoughtful ear. It's been very successful, and we'll be able to run that through the remainder of this year. We've provided other social emotional learning opportunities for educators, and we were able to fund 140 new school counselor and social worker positions. There is a state grant that has been in place for the last 3 years that's provided a base level, and we were able to fund additional positions. One of the challenges, quite candidly, there is that we do have schools who have funding who are not able to identify resources. So we have schools that want to hire social workers who don't have social workers in their community who are applying for those positions. So that is an area of growth in the state that we are definitely thinking about how to be more strategic in promoting school counselor and social worker positions. I talked a little bit about the digital divide early on. We have created the Office of Digital Teaching and Learning. That partnership created the ability for there to be laptops and hotspots through the city of Phoenix and through Phoenix Library. Something else that I think is really pretty phenomenal is called the Final Mile Project. That's the second bullet. The Arizona Rural Schools Association has been working on the Final Mile Project. We were able to partner with them and provide some additional funding. And the final mile means it takes it from the school to the home. So everything that we've done so far within the state to support education around internet has been providing that to the schools, which is obviously a need. But COVID demonstrated that just having internet access at a school doesn't help if your students can't come to school. So if they don't have internet in their home, they still don't have equitable access to education. And that is particularly true for our tribal communities. So the Final Mile Project, and if I can find a link, I'll put it in our chat as well, because I won't be able to speak to their statistics fully to, I think, provide just how phenomenal the work is. But they are creating the infrastructure to get broadband from the school to the homes, and in many cases even to the charter buildings on a tribal community, to churches, to just be able to provide community access so that students are not in a position where if they're not at school, they don't have access, which is really important. Something else I wanted to talk to, which you've probably been talking and thinking about over the last year, is that we lost a lot of students in COVID. The numbers that were in the press were varied. Our numbers are 38,000, over 38,000 students. It depends on how you look at the enrollment data. But between 19 and 20, and school year 20 and 21, we had about 40,000 less students attending school. And we noticed that there were significant increases in this impact in our kindergarten classrooms, which isn't super surprising because parents were just opting to do kindergarten at home instead of doing online learning, which is very challenging for our youngest learners. So some parents just said, we're not going to enroll in school and sit our kid in front of a computer, and kindergarten's not a mandatory grade. So parents have that choice. So we found that many parents did homeschool for kindergarten. But there were several other grades that were highly impacted, including our high school students, many of whom were working as opposed to attending school. And this is something that not just the Department of Ed, but all of our partners in education were really concerned about. Where are these kids because of their safety? School provides a tremendous resource related to mental health, food, education. I mean, it is a concern, especially in our needier communities, when we don't have access to kids and kids don't have access to resources. Are they safe? Are they learning? Another piece of this is DES indicated that the number of student referrals for support went down tremendously. So we were very concerned that we didn't know where all of our children were. And we wanted to do something kind of outside of the box. We were working with our state partners already on ways to identify students, but we invested in a marketing campaign called Ready for School Task Force that we launched last April. You may have seen billboards. There were several in the Phoenix metro area, as well as a lot that was on television and the internet, really focused on why students needed to be back in person. And so that billboard just says you can't learn the library voice at home. There were a lot of other things that were sort of targeted on why students learned better when they had access to an in-person classroom. It was in Spanish and English. And we also had an enrollment hotline at the department that we kept for 4 months. And we received hundreds of calls from parents through the hotline who saw the campaigns, who wanted to re-enroll their students. Let me see if we talk about this. Yes. So fast forward to the school year, and this data is from October. Our student counts have begun to rebound. So our current ADM, and that's our average daily membership. So that's how many students are there on an average day, is up 3.5% year over year from September, which would basically account for the students that we did not see during the height of COVID. We're awaiting final enrollment numbers, which we'll see in the spring, but there is definitely optimism that the students who were opting out of education are now, or at least structured in-person learning, are now returning to classrooms. And it's really, as we've been investing in social emotional learning supports, and we've seen how important it is, we recognize that if we don't have all students in front of teachers who can provide these supports, then we're not going to be in a position to move the state forward to heal and thrive after COVID. All right, last phase of funding. I mentioned there were 3 phases of ESSER. The last has a slightly different name. It falls under ESSER, but it's called the American Rescue Plan. That was initiated under President Biden. And it required a few different pieces, which I think have been very wise. It required stakeholder engagement. And we initiated an Equitable and Effective Schools Task Force that I mentioned, met twice in June to provide feedback. It also required the department to submit an American Rescue Plan to the U.S. Department of Ed, which U.S. Ed had to approve. And ours in Arizona has been approved. It was approved a couple of months ago. So once it's approved, the funding flows to the state. And then it also required a new application process for us. So when we get federal money, there within the ESSER plan, there's always 2 fronts. It's money that is entitlement money that goes straight to the LEAs to our local education agencies, and the department is just a pass-through. All three of the ESSER funding that was designated to go to schools was designed to go to Title I schools only. So the Department of Ed receives the funding. We already have our Title I schools identified, and we have a process in place that we just continued to use with just more money. We push that money out through our grant system to Title I schools. The second piece is that the state education agency receives set-aside funding that they then have to spend or invest in. And that money is what's been used for Discovery, ASU Math Momentum, some of those other key pieces I've showed you, plus the link that I put in the chat. This third round, instead of the department investing like we've been doing, we opened up a request for grant application process where we said, we are not going to decide, we are not going to make the decisions around our third round of federal funding. We are going to let community partners apply for this money. So we did that over 6 weeks. We closed the grant application process 2 weeks ago. We have 220 community partners who have applied with projects, which is incredibly exciting, that they are now looking for the department to fund to help the Department of Education meet the needs of our state and our schools. So we are in a review process now. We have a public rubric that we are evaluating, and it's really the first time I can remember, and I started at the department in 2013, where we are doing a statewide application process for funding that doesn't just isn't automatically determined through an entitlement process. So that's something I'll be excited to share, and it will be on our website once we make the determination of how to fund. I think we looked at the fact that with just the first 50 applications, we would have expended all of our ARP funding. So we will have to make some decisions, but the choices are phenomenal. So, and just as an example, if you're familiar with Read On Arizona, they're a partner that's applied, the United Way, the YMCAs, there's several, all in education, several partners who have applied to be able to support schools, which is exciting. Our goal is to accelerate academic success. So we're moving beyond the pandemic with these ESSER 3 funding and looking at enriching and reinforcing learning, social and emotional, which is the second, and student and family re-engagement and support. All right. I think I might have gone too long, Phyllis. I don't know what your agenda allows for. I didn't think I could fill a half an hour, and it looks like I might have filled 45 minutes. So
You know what? That's great, because you've given us some really good information. We don't have very many questions in the chat, but I expect that there will be several coming up soon.
Kate,
One
you want to
question.
stop your screen share for a minute?
oh yes, please, thanks.
Okay, one question that came through on the chat, and I also have a question. When you talk about teacher recruitment, where do things stand as far as teacher recruitment? And another question, are there any specific initiatives at the state level to recruit new teachers?
I would say that one of the pieces of information that was interesting in looking at year over year from 2019 and 2020 till now is that we haven't seen a dramatic increase in teachers leaving the classroom, which was predicted. So especially from the first year of the pandemic into 2021, teachers held really steady in their work. But we were already at a deficit. So we typically start every year 1,000 teachers down from what we need. And the ways that that's resolved is that we combine classrooms, we have emergency substitutes. So that situation, while it hasn't been to this point dramatically increased because of the pandemic, it certainly has not been helped or improved. So some of the statewide initiatives that we're working on, the job board is one that we're working on. The other is that we're partnering with, oh, shoot, hold on, let me think for a second. We did a job fair and we were able to promote that way, but there was something at the tip of my tongue in the partnership, and I've got to think for a second in how that works. The answer is that the department is not leading a statewide initiative, but we are partnering with folks that are. So we're partnering with our human resources departments. Oh, this is what I was going to say. I'm sorry. The other thing that we're doing is we're working on grow your own projects, and we're also working with our CTE program to allow for students who are to build the Educator Rising program. So students that are in the organization that leads to teaching, to make that work more robust so that they're actually getting their associate's degree, and that they're moving forward in a way that provides them the ability to do some student internship teaching within their schools sooner as opposed to later. The other piece that I think is really interesting is the fact that our community colleges will now have bachelor's degrees for education. And what we've heard from Maricopa County is that they are looking to have education as one of their first four-year bachelor degree programs. So our certification department is working closely with those initiatives to make them as smooth and easy as possible as far as certification.
That sounds pretty exciting. It sounds very forward thinking.
I think so too.
We have to look at not just the next year or two, but 5 years down the line as far as teachers. You said that you've had increased funding over the last 20 months, significantly increased funding. Where is that funding primarily coming from?
The federal government.
Okay. And do they specify what that is to be spent on, or is that up to the Department of Education to determine?
That's a great question. So for the first two rounds of funding, they did not specify. It was fairly flexible. It was under the umbrella of COVID relief. So that money could go towards academics, staffing, physical resources like hand sanitizer, ventilation, anything that was related to COVID relief recovery. The third round, which is the round I spoke to, that is the request for grant applications, that ARP funding did have three specific buckets. It had to talk about academic interventions, summer school or after school learning, and social and emotional learning. So the state has to invest in be able to clearly demonstrate that we're meeting those requirements.
Good, sounds great. One question I have, we're reading more and more about violence in schools, and I was reading this morning about schools having to shut down for just a day and all students going back to virtual learning. And some of the educators are saying, because we're so experienced with virtual learning, we can do this very quickly. Is that true of Arizona, do you feel?
I do. I can use an example that's related specifically actually to weather. So Holbrook Unified, which is north, they typically have to close for snow throughout the year. And their superintendent has shared with us that this year they will not close school. Well, they may close their physical buildings and not run their buses, but they will transition to online learning on days in which they previously had to close fully. So I think that many of our schools are putting that provision in place so that they're able to transition pretty quickly and provide online learning as opposed to in-person instruction in emergency situations.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've got experience in doing this, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Are there efforts, you talked about some of the efforts to help children catch up, having been out of school for almost a year with remote learning. Are there any other efforts that you're aware of to help children catch up?
Yes, there are several, and many of them are going to be school and site-based efforts, such as in more intensive opportunities during the school day and after school learning. There were intensive summer schools that were held throughout the state. The governor also funded something called the Acceleration Academies and invested $20 million and allowed the Department of Ed to administer that grant. And I mentioned earlier that we use data provided to us by MAG to help determine which of our schools across the state were impacted, not just academically, because that would be historically, but then also by unemployment, by severe disease, by lack of digital resources. There were 183 schools that met a threshold to qualify. Those schools were provided additional resources to meet that gap that we're talking about, to help students catch up. And one of the things I like the best about that investment is that it provided letters training, which is intense literacy training. It was if you accepted the grant, then you were required to provide letters training in an elementary school to all of your teachers, in a secondary school to your ELA teachers. The outcomes of those are long-term, so that it's not just a one-shot thing to help kids catch up, but it provides training for teachers to increase year-over-year literacy outcomes for students.
Thank you. Another question comes from one of our members, Polly, who said, are charter schools eligible to apply for the new grants?
Yes, all public education schools and our charter schools are public schools. They are eligible to apply, and they also received, if they were Title I school, they received all of the other grants. And we actually also offset so that schools that weren't Title I and didn't qualify for an automatic allocation, the department used some of their state set aside to fund those schools as well. And that included our charter schools and also our CTED schools, which are our career and technical education schools.
Okay. From Henny, can you address the constitutional limit on school funding that may significantly decrease funds this year?
Yes, so I can't get too deep into the why this, the origin of this was created. I understand it was well before my time at the department in the 80s. The legislature passed what's called the aggregate expenditure limit, and that limits how much funding schools can receive in an annual year. This is an issue this year because of Prop 208. So if schools were to receive additional funds through that, and then they're also looking at some other statewide fundings like Prop 301 and their federal funding that they've received over the last couple of years, they will exceed the amount of funding that they are to receive in an annual year. And if the legislature does not choose to override the aggregate expenditure limit, then schools' annual budgets could be decreased in the second half of the school year by millions of dollars. And so, as you can imagine, there are several advocacy organizations out there, including other superintendent groups, that are working with the legislature to avoid this outcome. We're hopeful at the Department of Ed that our legislators and the legislature do not want to see millions of dollars be taken from public education. But it will require action on behalf of the legislature to avoid that.
We, as a group, talk about the impact of charter schools on the public school funding. Do you feel that there are more charter schools now than before because of the pandemic, or is it pretty much the same, or are there fewer?
I would say it's pretty much the same. We have looked at enrollment between charter and district LEAs. During the pandemic, we saw an increase in attendance at charter schools. Some of that can be attributed to the fact that the several charter schools offered in-person instruction when local districts did not. So parents who wanted in-person instruction as opposed to digital instruction did move students out of traditional district schools and into charter schools. What we've seen over the last year is a leveling of that. And in fact, as I talked about our school enrollment increasing, the charter school enrollment has not increased at the same pace, which we think reflects a movement from charters back to districts as in-person instruction has been provided statewide. As far as number of charters, the superintendent is a voting member on the charter school board, and I sat on our December meeting on her behalf, and there were the charter, they have to approve annually new charters. There were only 4 applications for new charters in the coming school year. So, and one of which is for an alternative, it was through Goodwill. So it would be for students that are 18 to 21. So I didn't see a huge growth in applications for new charters in the state.
Well, and I find it very exciting to hear about the agencies, like, as you said, the YWCA and so on, that are partnering with the Department of Education. I find that just very encouraging. And as a branch of AAUW, we are becoming much more involved with our local school district, Continental School District, which is a small district with high needs. So
Yeah.
I think we're all encouraged to do our part. This is our future.
Well, and I think, Phyllis, sorry, I was just going to say that that's really one thing that's been the greatest outcome for us in education through the pandemic is the level of collaboration with partners who were, so in increased collaboration with traditional partners like higher ed and some of our, the teachers union and some of our obvious partners, but the number of partners who are invested in the same outcomes, but maybe weren't as actively involved and the department didn't have such an outreach, that has increased so much through the pandemic. And I think using virtual ways to meet has allowed for better and stronger collaboration with our education partners in the state. So I think that's one of our greatest benefits. We want to continue to leverage that.
And time will tell if people stay committed. Hopefully they will. As a group, I think our group is very committed to the future, but hopefully other groups will stay committed as well. Kate, thank you so very much for your time. This has just been invaluable. I think we've all learned a lot. We may have more questions as we go along, and I may forward some of those to you.
Please do. Please do. Thank you so much for letting the Department of Ed be part of your time this morning.
And we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Have a wonderful holiday.
You too.
Happy holidays. And Kate, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you.
Education is dear to our heart, all of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
I'd like to open the business portion of our meeting with our mission statement. AAUW advances gender equity for women and girls through research, advocacy, and education. So that being said, we have an update on LunaFest. Susan and Phyllis. Maybe.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Phyllis and everyone.
Susan's got something pretty exciting to show you, but I'll deal with the mundane. As you know, the LunaFest is coming up. It's February 19th. Request has gone out to interest groups where we're not going to do the traditional baskets as we've done in the past. Individual groups are doing something. Some groups are creating a monetary fund. Some are buying gift cards. Some groups are donating items. Keep in mind that you as an individual can donate items. As you open your Christmas presents and you open something and you think, what were they thinking? I don't need another one of those. It's a good thing to donate. If you have any questions, please call me. There will be an announcement in the Valley View coming out in about 2 weeks that will talk about donating. But we want to make this as good a raffle as we can. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to show you this exciting project.
Okay, hello everyone. I have my screen this way for a reason, which you'll see shortly. So the Needles and More interest group members have been working on a group project as an additional fundraiser other than the raffle and LunaFest. We've created a quilt which I'm going to show you, and then I'll tell you about it.
Ah,
Think. Does that work? I guess you can see it. The pictures, they're individual pictures on the quilt, were created by Carolyn Morley. As you know, our group is known as Needles and More. Well, Carolyn is the more part, and it's interesting, her name is Morley, as an aside, because she doesn't use a needle, she draws, she's an artist. So she drew the drawings for each of the squares, and then our members embroidered them. They were hand embroidered by Phyllis Jefferton, Joyce Davison, Pat Young, Gail Garrison, Jerry Peterson, Deb Woythall, and Karen Lewick. And then the little fabric squares that are around each drawing, let's see, the fabric was collected by Linda Laird and B. Kabler. And then those 240 little squares that you see around each picture were sewn together by B. Kabler. And then I put it all together and I'm doing the quilting. So it was a fun collaborative effort by all the members of our interest group. We'll be selling raffle tickets around town in January and February, and the drawing will be held in February during the LunaFest raffle on Zoom. And you can look for details in email blasts that will be coming up and in the January and February Valley News about how and where you can buy tickets and to take a chance on winning our quilt. So save the date of February 19th for LunaFest in general. We'll be doing it virtually as we did last year, and the raffle will also be done virtually. So there'll be more information about the hows and whys and where to's of all this in January and February.
And if we have new members who are saying, what is LunaFest? It is sponsored by the Luna Company, the company that makes energy bars. And it's a series of films or short films produced by, for, and about women. Some of them are very humorous, some of them are very thought-provoking, well worth it. Some people might think about as one of their Christmas gifts to their daughters-in-law, relatives, female people that they know, is to tell them to save the date, and you will buy them a ticket, or you can give them the information and they can buy a ticket. Very, very interesting films. They've been worth every minute that I've spent watching them. So thank you, everybody. And let us know if you come up with some good ideas for our raffle.
Phyllis and Susan, thank you so much. And I want to encourage people to invite other friends, relatives. I mean, I have 3 sisters who I've encouraged to buy a ticket. You know, they would love it, but they don't live here. They live in Virginia and Iowa and Colorado. That doesn't, because it's virtual, they can join us. So I encourage you to do that. So then I'm going to turn this over to Kathy. I've asked her to repeat what she said last month, in case you missed it, regarding the survey and our future in the next month or 2.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Marie. As Marie mentioned, she asked me to again review the results of our survey regarding whether we should return to in-person meeting or not. The results, which were collected in November, showed that the vast majority of our members felt only comfortable returning to meeting in person if we required masks, proof of vaccination, and assured that seating was socially distanced. While GVR encourages people to follow the public health guidelines and recommendations, they do not mandate masks or proof of vaccinations. And so if we were to use their facilities, we couldn't deny access to any of our meetings for anyone who was not masked, who was not vaccinated, or who was unwilling to provide proof of vaccination. So with all of this in mind, the board voted at our November meeting to continue to meet virtually, at least for the time being, until future notice. Of course, all of that was done pre-Omicron. And so I think now, if we were to do a new survey, I think not only would we find the same results, but people would even feel more strongly about that with the new variant circulating so widely and so rapidly. So again, you can look at the specific percentages of the vote on all of the questions in our December Valley View, which you can find online and get the specific response of the answers to the responses. But at least at this point, going forward, until further notice and for an indefinite period of time, we'll continue to meet virtually. I think it's not anyone's first choice because we feel we all can get so much from being together, but it's important that we assure the safety of all of our members. And so this is the course of action that we'll be taking moving forward. The other thing is, if you know anybody out there who would like to join us, but is uncomfortable using Zoom, please let me know. And we'll try to arrange to get some support to that person. We wouldn't want lack of familiarity or lack of facility with Zoom to bar anybody from attending our meetings. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I appreciate that. You mentioned the newsletter. I want to have a special thank you to Cynthia, Cynthia Surprise, who is our newsletter editor, who does a superb job. And when I thank her for doing a wonderful job, she always says, well, it's the people who contribute. Yes, that is important, but she puts it together. She crafts it. It's beautiful and it is full of information. So if you haven't read it, go to our website and read the newsletter, and thank you, Cynthia. But because the deadline for the next newsletter is always the Saturday after our general meeting today. Well, Saturday's a holiday. So we have moved the deadline for the newsletter to Friday, December 24th. So you'll get your January newsletter. And thank you, Cynthia. The next board meeting is Monday, January 10th. So if you have issues you wish to bring to the attention of anyone on the board, please let us know. The next general meeting is Tuesday, January 18th. Put that on your calendar. You don't want to miss it. And I hope you have a healthy, happy holiday and a super healthy, happy new year. And I'll see you January 18th. Bye.